بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم. Alright, we have stopped last time at chapter 8. We finished chapter 8 and we're about to begin chapter 9. And chapter 8, if you guys remember, it was about time management and the preferred time for the acquisition of knowledge or for learning. In chapter 9, we move to the topic of helpfulness and good advice. Okay, if you guys remember, we've talked before about the importance of study groups and the importance of learning communities and learning environments, and how when you go to understand or when you're about to understand a certain topic or to grasp a certain field, it's either you're going by yourself, stranded, so to speak. You only have your own experiences, your past history with learning or with any other subjects other than the subject that's at hand that you're trying to understand at the current time. Also, you have certain abilities. These abilities, I mean, some sort, they're limited, alright? On the other hand, if you study in a group or within a learning community or a learning environment, it's more than one mind, it's more than one experience, it's more than one past. It's more than just a single group of accumulative knowledge or information. People join together with different perspectives to understand a given subject. And we have also talked about, and all of this is discussed in this chapter as well, about how to give an advice and also how to seek an advice or how to propose a certain inquiry or a topic for discussion or debate. And if you guys remember, you would have two ways to, if you're having a study group or if you want to propose a question for discussion or debate with either a professor or a teacher or a group of learning mates or study mates, you can either say, look, I understand what you're saying, but the way I see it is so and so and so. Or, I guess you're wrong, the way it should be is da-da-da. Or, no, you definitely don't get it right. The right way to understand this is so and so and so. And there is, see, I mean, and it starts to the most extreme, like, what? What are you talking about? This is absolutely wrong. Huh? So, I mean, you have all these different spectrums of how to propose something. On the other hand, it can be more of, like, okay, that's interesting. What do you think, or how would you answer somebody if they propose or if they, pose a certain question that says so-and-so? Okay, well, I see where you're coming from, but perhaps somebody else might see it differently, and they would say, right? See, there are different ways to pose a question or some kind of criticism or critique or a question that you want to establish a debate or some kind of discussion out of that question. Same thing with a professor or a teacher. They might say something that is wrong, and experts and teachers do make mistakes. But here there's a point, though, that I need to point out. There's a difference between a mistake that is a result of poor reasoning, and there's a mistake out of, they call it like a stupid mistake. Alright, somebody who did not pay attention, out of fatigue, out of exhaustion, out of not paying attention, out of, the working memory is overloaded with stuff. Some teachers or professors or experts, they do have troubles in their lives outside of the learning, classroom. They come with responsibilities other than the responsibility of the field that you're experts in. And why am I talking about this? Because there's this notion of, and I know we're going a little bit off tangent here. We're getting tangent, and I know math. Okay. how do we define an expert? This is one way to, this is related to what we're talking about. How can we know that this person is an expert and that person is not? There's this notion called illusion of knowledge. People jump to conclusions about who's an expert and who's not because they usually jump to conclusions about their own understanding. Okay, and they have done several experiments. There's a book that talked about this called The Invisible Gorilla. You might want to take a look at it. It's also in the field of cognitive biases. So one of the biases that they talked about, called the illusion of knowledge, that people jump to conclusions about their own understanding. And they've done an experiment, for example, like they asked people to draw a bicycle, alright? So they would draw a bike. And anybody, if you ask anyone to draw a simple bicycle, they would draw a single bicycle. But then then they would ask people to rate their knowledge about bicycles, like how much do you know about bikes? So on average, people, the sample that they have studied, 4.5 out of 7. Like if they would rate themselves, they would put themselves as average, 4.5 out of 7. That's even a little bit above average, because average would be 3.5. So they see themselves as people or as individuals who have a fair knowledge or a good knowledge about bikes. And then, after that, the third step, they would start asking them questions about how bicycles operate. They would ask them about how bicycles operate. Okay, like how the pedals are being attached, alright? Differences between, is it like the different gears? Is it like a single gear or more than one gear? And things of that nature. So people start, having troubles. And then the key, the tipping point in that experiment, when they start asking people, why is that? Okay, so maybe they can describe how the bicycle is being built, or how is it being designed or manufactured. But once they start asking people, why is it done that way, not the other way around? People start getting, I don't know, they start giving up. They don't continue further on in the discussion. And what they concluded, or tried to conclude out of this study, that people jump to conclusions about their own understandings of things that are common in their lives. So many of the things that you come, that you interact with in your life, perhaps maybe it's a watch or something. You might think that you know a lot. It might be a mobile phone. You might think that you know a lot of things. But in reality, when you start asking yourself the why question, you start figuring out, oh, I just know things that are really on the surface. I don't know a lot in the gist of the matters. And you find this when people, when companies, they try to sell gadgets, they try to talk about the technical issues in a mobile phone or in a tablet or something, but at the same time they make it seem as if you understand. So they tell you, oh, and it's provided with a camera with da-da-da pixels and I don't know, I can't even recall the things that they use, which allows you to capture I don't know how many frames in a single. So you think while you're reading that you understand, but it's just the wording of it. Why? Because if they took out the words that says which allows you to do so and so, and they only said it's a camera with da-da-da pixels and captures da-da-da frames in a millisecond. I don't know. And you were like, okay, is that good or bad? Okay. But when they add some words that allows you to see yourself as somebody who understands, you start saying what? Oh, that phone that phone is good. And you start making conclusions yourself about something that's not you. You understand? You're not making conclusions now about yourself, you're making conclusions about the device that you're trying to buy. Why? Because they made that illusion of knowledge. They made you believe that you understand. So what will happen? you start making conclusions about other things that you don't understand other than yourself. Okay? So this is the whole thing about illusion of knowledge. Okay, what is that relate? How is that related to advice and experts? We're talking about how experts might say something wrong. And when experts make mistakes, you want to bring up some kind of a hint. Listen, what you're saying is kind of contradicting to whatever you have said before. And in order to do that, you have to know who's an expert and who's not. The person, in order to decide or to distinguish a real expert from a phony, from a pseudo-expert, is that the mistakes by pseudo-experts are usually in the reasoning itself. They usually go out of the consensus of any of their fields. The mistakes are usually foundational. All right, the basics, the commonalities of the field that they're claiming they're experts in. Those other real experts, their mistakes are usually in things that are, as I said before, stupid mistakes. Like instead of saying a word, they would say something else, like a slip of a tongue. That's the kind of mistakes that experts, like real ones, would usually fall into. But pseudo-experts, they make those mistakes because they want to, they present themselves as if they are real experts, but in reality they're phony. So the more and more they talk, the more and more they're being asked the why question, problems starts coming up. Okay? So the way you should give an advice to an expert or seek an inquiry from an expert is to pretty much do the same thing that I had mentioned earlier in a study group. An expert may have said a slip of a tongue, so you can go like, you have said so and so, is that correct? You can say it that way. And you can say, huh? Did you just say that? That also would not work. But instead, you can rephrase what they said using the correct word. And if they did not notice, then you automatically would think that, okay, that was a slip of a tongue. Because now I have repeated the same meaning that they have just said in a different way using the correct terminology. And they did not say, they did not pay attention or notice that they have made a slip of a tongue earlier or something like that. See, the way you deal with an expert or the way you deal with a classmate, you would find that Imam Zarnuji is saying that it's okay to kind of give up a little bit of your pride for the sake of seeking knowledge. You find him saying something along these lines. All right, that you kind of give a little bit of your own personal pride, and we're not talking about arrogance. Arrogance is an absolute no-no. But there is a difference between arrogance and pride. Pride is not that. Pride, which is izzah, that's not bad. Arrogance is takabbur, that is bad. You understand? And because people confuse both emotions, actually. Outside of the learning how to learn realm, in terms of emotions, people confuse being proud and being arrogant. So again, you may give up a little bit of your pride for the sake of seeking knowledge, and that is something that Imam Zarnuji is saying. It's a little bit pragmatic if you think about it, just to put things in the very, in this kind of reductionism. If you want to reduce it, it's kind of pragmatic. You're seeking a benefit, so you don't have to, acting as somebody who's full of himself. Okay? All right, I guess this notion is pretty clear by now. Another issue is, see, when dealing in the fields of knowledge or information, I guess in our modern day, it's very competitive, right? You find him in the beginning of this chapter. He's talking about how envy and jealousy is very much connected to the, the field of knowledge and the field of learning and information and so forth. And now we're living in a knowledge boom age, so to speak. All right, companies not only or corporations not only they compete in the field of technological advances, or they compete in terms of revenue, they compete in terms of information. Who has more information about his own products? Who can gather more information about people who are buying their services? And they get into, knowledge management for corporations. Same thing for nations. Same thing for, you can say, for individuals as well. People compete in how much knowledge they have. So envy and jealousy can be a very destructive, and it's something that is apparent in learning now, because people are using knowledge as a competitive edge. It's not as simple competition anymore. With the capitalism and the industrial age and so forth, and the technological advances, as I've just said, people are competing with how much knowledge they have. So again, if you bring out the full of myself character, if you bring out, I'm very proud of myself, this kind of engages people in kind of hostility, and it becomes, learning becomes full of critique, full of jealousy and envy and so forth. Another issue with regards to advice, and this is something applicable whether to learning how to learn, or applicable to competitive advantages between scholars, or between universities, or between companies. Another notion that is related to both of these things, and also related to relationships, is how do you give an advice to a spouse, for example? How do you give an advice to a friend? How do you give an advice to a father? I mean, what we have just said is applicable to all of these. I mean, a father, same thing. You're talking about a teacher or an expert or a professor. Same way. I mean, same thing. You want to give an advice to your father. How do you bring it out? You don't have to be that proud of yourself that you have found your father, made a mistake, and you want to bring out that mistake in a certain way. You want to teach him something. All right, and this is something that I've personally discovered after I became a father. You understand? Like, back then, when I wanted to correct my father in something, I used to do it in a way that does not work. But I could only admit that after I became a father. You understand? Like for example, my wife would raise my son, for example, to always wear a slipper. Now you guys know too much, right? Too much details and yet so much information, right? Okay. So he's raised in a way that he always has to put a slipper on. And so if I ever took off my slipper, just for the sake of wearing socks, because I'm going out, he would go like, "Where's your slipper?" What's wrong? Right? Like, he yells at me, like, put on your slipper. Don't walk like that. Wear a slipper. I'm like, okay. And sometimes it gets on my nerves, like, this is not right. It's like, who's the father here, right? Like, man, just wake up. And then I remember, like, what I used to do with my father. This is payback time, I know. So I don't have to complain about this. I'm not complaining, like, kind of. But anyways, the point is, you might think that you have the right to give an advice. People, when they find mistakes, or when they have more knowledge than the person in front of them, they believe automatically that I, in an above level, in above state, I have something to provide. I have something to give. The person in front of me should be thankful that I'm actually showing them, that I'm actually giving them. They're receiving the information from me. All right? But in reality, this is, theoretically speaking, yes. But cognitively speaking and emotionally speaking, it's not that way. There are different things that kind of become an obstacle in front of that simple transmission of give and receive advice and hints. Alright? And for this reason, people have to use a technique called reframing. That I was just applying it from the very beginning. Okay, you can say the same thing, or you can see the same thing, but in different ways if you use reframing. And reframing, sometimes they apply it as a cognitive skill. Like you can see things from different perspectives, you put different frames, you create different contexts for the same event or for the same fact. Same thing, you do reframing for words. You can say the same meaning, but in different frames, in different contexts. Alright? So I believe reframing is one of the most important things in nowadays. Actually, reframing is actually built on another idea. The Sharif al-Jurjani, who is a Muslim scholar in the 8th or 9th Hijri century, he talked about two notions. He said there is some, and I will say them in Arabic and then I'll translate. He said there is something called ilm shay'i min wajh versus ilm shay'i bi dhalika al-wajh. Knowing something from a certain perspective and knowing something through that perspective. Okay? In other words, knowing something from a certain angle, a certain direction, and knowing something through that direction. Okay? I could give you an example. Like, okay, a pen. Where's the, what? Where's the pen? Okay, here. Alright? So if I'm talking about that pen, I can see it as a writing tool. Okay? So if I see it from the perspective of a utility for writing, so I can say, okay, so I saw this. This is the seeing something from a perspective. So I saw it as a writing tool. And I will use that angle, that perspective, to understand everything about it. So when I start looking, so what kind of ink does it use? It uses that gel ink because it allows you to have smooth, way to write. Okay? And it has this grip, which allows you when you're holding it, and you're writing for a long period of time, it allows you, it does not hurt your fingers, for example. Okay? And I can go on and on and on. And how the ink does not, go off fast, and how maybe the ink dries off quickly, and that way it does not stain, your clothes, your hands, and so forth. So now I have used one perspective to look, and so now I have learned about this pen, or I saw this pen, let's say that I perceived this pen from a certain perspective, and then I used that perspective to learn everything else about the pen. In other words, if I'm a manufacturer, so I can start saying, okay, so this pen is plastic. Okay, we use this plastic that is, made in China. I don't even have to read. Okay, so it's probably made in China, and it costs, money. And we also use this grip, and we buy it from, Singapore, and it's assembled in a factory, in Taiwan, and go on and on and on. Why? Because I perceived the pen from the very beginning as a manufacturer who is analyzing this as a product from the sense of how it was created. Okay? So Sharif al-Jurjani was talking about this, again, about 600 years ago, or 500 years ago, that the way you perceive something is most probably used as the way to judge something as well. Alright? So if you perceive it from a certain perspective, and you see it from a certain perspective and angle and direction, usually, or you can, use that direction to understand everything else about it. You understand? This is very much connected to reframing that we've talked about. And I believe this skill of differentiating between different perspectives and contexts of a single thing, like this. And we can go on. Okay? We can analyze this then according to marketing and how we can market to people. We can analyze this then according to health and hygiene, and it goes on, and we can analyze this then according to sustainability and green environmental movements and things like that, right? And it goes on, and we can analyze this then according to color and different shades of red that it can come into, and so on. So the first way you perceive something, you can use it to learn everything else about it. But you have to know something, that everything else that you learn is bound to the primary perspective, to the way you saw it. And this is boiled down to one rule in the Muslim tradition. الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. If you want to judge something, usually your judgment is based upon the way you perceived it. So judgment is a fruit, is a branch of perception. So the more perceptions you have, the multiple judgments you have upon the same entity, upon the same idea, upon the same concept, upon the same event, upon the same circumstance. You understand? Like, for example, I came in late today, right? You can see it as, well, you came in late today, and you came in late for which reason? For the reason of your son's birthday. Okay, well, you knew that a month ago. You could have organized your time in a different way, right? And you did not have to delay us today. Or you could have told us from the very beginning that I'll be delayed for 1 hour. Another person might say, well, obviously he tried to come instead of canceling it, and perhaps because it's a birthday, so even if he prepared himself to finish up early, birthdays, family events in a day like that can be stretched longer than prepared for. So you can see it that way, and you can see it the other way. You understand? So, and I'm just giving you this as an example. Same thing that happens in relationships, same thing that happens between, people in a study group, or people between amateurs and experts, and political realities as well is subject to this concept of reframing and the concept of seeing things from different perspectives, and how every single person has his own perspective of seeing things, and that is reflected in their judgments, one way or another. Okay? Actually understanding this helps you to give an advice. Because before you start talking and giving advice to people or asking advice, you should consider how do they see things. Alright? And that will be connected to the notion of ethics of reciprocity, or that ethics of the golden rule. The golden rule, which is treat others the way you want to be treated. Okay? And all of these ideas, concepts that I've talked about are very much related to each other. And this is in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is, no one of you would reach the high level of belief. The literal translation, no one of you would be a believer, but the meaning is, no one would reach the full belief, or the ultimate belief, unless they love for their brother, unless you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Okay? And by the way, some atheists have said, there's no mention of the golden rule in the Quran. Okay, as explicit. See, there is a golden rule and there is a silver rule. The golden rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. Okay? The silver rule is the negative formula. Okay? Okay, like don't treat others the way you don't want to be treated. Okay? Alright. So anyways, so that some atheists have said there is no mention of the golden rule as explicit as I've just described it in the Quran. And actually they are correct in this. And this is one of the most interesting things in the Muslim tradition between the Quran and the Sunnah, the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ. That usually the Sunnah, the sayings of the Prophet, they explain the Quran. Alright? In this particular incident, the hadith, which is you would not reach the ultimate belief or the high belief or the full, complete belief unless you love for your brother what you love for yourself, is summarizing what's in the Quran. You understand? This is one of the very rare things that you'd find. That a saying of the Prophet is summarizing multiple rules in the Quran. Alright? So anyways, coming back, we don't want to go off topic. Coming back, again, giving advice or seeking advice should be built upon reciprocity. That you put in consideration the other person's position or stance or situation or circumstances before you give advice or before you seek advice as well. Okay. The chapter after that is chapter 10. Go ahead.
Chapter 9, he told about if you educate yourself, it's better than you teach your enemy. Like if you have to conquer somewhere, first you want to educate yourself, and it's like easier to.
Yeah, he said it is stated you should apply yourself to things useful to your soul, not to conquer your enemy. Yeah, again, I mean, the way he sees knowledge as not as a competitive edge, as much as something beneficial to the person. Yes, it might be used, and it can be used as a competitive edge. It can be used as something to conquer enemies, but at the same time, it's the very first reason why would a person seek knowledge or trying to learn, trying to understand is for your own benefit, the benefit of your own soul, not to show off. This is what he's doing cognitive reframing. Because if he said it directly, as I was saying it, don't learn, okay, if you're trying to show off. People would immediately say, well, I'm not trying to show off, okay, I will learn. But there might be a hidden desire that they want to show off. And if he tackled that desire explicitly, he would actually assist the desire to prevail. Because people would not admit their desires. They would not say, yes, I am learning to show off. So what he's doing, he's going around it. He's saying what? Let's grant that those people are enemies. Alright? And those people, you want to show them the real knowledge and how they don't understand anything, and you want to defeat them. But wait a second. In order to do that, you have to benefit yourself first. You understand? And this is very much connected to the thing that we have talked about regarding Shaykh Zarruq, when he said that it's better to play around, or to, how do I say it? To use tricks, to trick yourself, to trick the self, rather than depending on the self. Alright? And we have talked about this last time, if you guys remember. Okay. You're welcome. Okay, chapter 10, on the means useful to attainment of knowledge. Again, and I'm sorry that if I'm repeating notions here, but Imam al-Zarnuji is actually, he's forcing us to do that. Again, he's over and over again stressing the notion of character in learning. I believe if somebody can reach Angela Duckworth from the University of Pennsylvania, we're talking about grit and patience and how how grit and perseverance is an indicator of success, perhaps above and beyond IQ levels. That people who show higher perseverance and higher grit and stronger self-control and so forth, this is an indicator for future success more than IQ levels. This is what she believed in, or she believes in, according to her studies and research. Well, here again, Imam Zarnuji, when he talks about the things that are useful to the attainment of knowledge, what he's focusing on is things that are related to the character. For example, he mentioned in the last, or the chapter, the paragraph before last, on page 63, he said it is essential for the student of knowledge to bear miseries and baseness patiently while seeking learning. And then he talked also about when we talked about the pride and flattery, he said flattery is blameworthy except in the quest of knowledge. So again, I mean, regardless, I know the second part about the flattery, it is not related to grit. But the idea is, he's bringing up again and again the idea of character and character qualities and traits that would allow a learner to go on in a learning journey. There's another idea that he touched upon in the very beginning of the chapter when he said it is necessary to him who is engaged in the pursuit of knowledge to seek it at all times so that he may attain excellence. And the way to attain knowledge is to have ink on hand on every occasion so that one can jot down items of scientific interest. Okay, well actually, again, here he's not talking about let's study all the time and not have any kind of rest. This is not his intention, obviously. But what he's talking about is to live with a learning spirit. Okay, you would find people who are always eager to learn things, to jot down information, to ask questions, trying to expose themselves to different venues of knowledge, and others who are more kind of routine, so to speak. And you find this usually with passion. See, what he's talking about, what he wanted to actually say, learn with passion. And I want you to note something. See, in the Muslim tradition, you would find they interleave between two things. One, sometimes you would mention things theoretical and you would leave out the applications for you to figure out. And other times you would mention an application and you would not say anything about the concept. They allow the reader to determine what is the concept. So here when he says it is necessary for the person who's engaged in seeking knowledge and so forth to do it all the time, and the way to do this is to have ink, meaning to have a like a pen with you to write things whenever you come across something that is of interest to your learning or to the field that you're trying to learn. This would not happen unless you're passionate. You understand? So what he's mentioning is an application or a practical view of being passionate. If you see anybody who's being passionate, how they act according to their passion, there is a spirit. Whatever they're learning is usually attainable in their minds. It's always there. Okay? So this is what he's talking about. Again, sometimes you would mention the theory and you would leave out the applications. And sometimes you would mention an application or a practical example, leaving out the concept for the reader to infer from the reading. And this is one of the things, this is what we have just did, is a metacognition. Okay, this is metacognition. You understand? Metacognition, for the teacher who's applying the concept of metacognition or meta-learning, he's trying to facilitate the interleaving of, we talked about interleaving before, if you guys remember. He's trying to facilitate the interleaving of study, meaning switching back and forth between different styles. So instead of every single time, they give you the concept, the theory, and after the theory, the practical examples. Here you go, go ahead, be spoon-fed. Instead of doing that, they interleave. Sometimes they would present the theory without applications, and they would ask the student, can you bring a relevant practical example for this theory that we have just mentioned? On the other hand, you would give a practical example, and they would leave out the concept to be conceptualized and rationalized by the reader and by the student. Okay? And this is opposite to the modern day teaching, whether in the West or in the East. Okay? Basically, theory, practical examples, practices, exam, done. Okay? But the kind of engagement where we start, see, I inferred from these two lines that he's talking about passion. You might see it as something different. And that would steer dialectic discussion about what is the author trying to say. And yet, we're not talking about a fiction book. We're talking about a non-fiction book. So for them to facilitate that kind of dialectic discussion in a non-fiction book is really interesting. You understand? Because usually in the West, this is done whether it's with a fiction book or a book that was written in like an ancient book or medieval philosophy books, where different contexts and different words have different meanings and things of that sort. But when we talk about a psychology textbook or a manual or an introductory textbook in any kind of field, things are usually straightforward. And then when they want you to think, they would have a part in the exercises. They would say, think. Check out textbooks, you'll find that. They'll tell you, like, you have a section where they would title it as think or critical thinking, and they would put like a light bulb icon next to it, which is really pathetic. It's like, okay, now it's time to think. Alright, back then, what I was doing. Oh, you're just being spoon-fed for that, all of that chapter. And now, let's think. Alright? So, again, they're interleaving the thinking with the spoon-feeding back and forth. And the more, just recently I read an article, that was last night actually. But of course, because that was last night, I can't recall any particular information about the study other than that it was posted on the Psychonomic Society page. Okay, that's a society that is they do conferences and studies about psychology and things of that sort. Okay, so the study that I was reading about yesterday, they talked about how when learners, and they were doing that with online learning, by the way, when learners feel, the more they feel that they have control over either the timing of the appearance of information or over the content of information, the better they retain knowledge in comparison to students who don't control anything at all. So if you have a sample where they either have full manipulation of the learning content, whether by time or by the subject, the field, or the topic, they choose the topic and they choose the timing of appearance of the information. Either they have full manipulation or they have minimum manipulation. In both cases, they're much better than students who don't manipulate anything at all. Okay? So, doing this interleaving part that we talked about, weaving questions, hidden questions within a text, and allowing the students to discover this on their own through discussion, rather than, okay, now we start the discussion, guys. All right, okay, now this is the critical thinking part. Now this is the vocabulary part. Now this is the terminology. Now this is the exercise. Instead of doing that, allowing them And by practice, they start, getting the grip of how things go. Okay? They start on their own, raise questions from the text. So they start believing that they have an input. They have an input in this. So the more the student believes that he or she is manipulating, even if it's very minimal, the learning process, or they have an input to the learning process, the much better they can retain the knowledge that they're trying to learn. So this is a clear advantage for online courses above, formal classrooms. There's a clear disadvantage for online courses, though, is that the distractions of the online learning, because it's just a switch of a tab and you're on Facebook. All right. But now students, they have their own mobile phones in classes, right? Okay. When he mentioned that the students of knowledge must bear miseries, what he's talking about here is a notion of growth mindset that we have talked about earlier on, and how failure is a pillar for learning. You cannot learn unless you fail. If you don't fail, then there's something wrong. Either you're a genius or something, or there's, I don't know. But no one achieved, no one reached up high, no one was able to, and I'm not talking about failing academic tests. Because again, hold on, I'll let you know why. Because there are some people who don't fail academic tests, but you find them, they're usually people who challenge themselves on their own. Like they would do the self-testing technique before they're being tested, and that's why they might be better at academic tests than others, because they're already self-testing themselves before they go to the exam, to the formal, official exam. But the idea of failure, the concept of failing, that if you fail at doing something, this is part of the learning process, that you have to fail in the beginning. You don't take things automatically. Okay, and this is Muhammad Meher, our fellow friend. He gave the example of how children learn how to walk. Right? They don't walk all of a sudden. They stand up, they fall, and they stand up again, and they fall, and they stand up, and so forth. They don't decide to crawl for the rest of their lives. So again, failing is a human aspect in learning. We're not machines. It's like you program it and you execute the code, and here you go. You have a working software. Even that, they have bugs and problems where you report them and they fix it. But again, a human being, part of being human is to make mistakes. Part of being human is to fail. This is part of our humanity. But how do we internalize this failing? How do you see it? Do you see it as a normal, evolving process, a process for development? Or do you see it as something hindering and, as an obstacle to achieve? Okay? All right. And then we've got chapter 11. Okay, what he's talking about in this chapter is, he said on abstinence during the pursuit of learning, which he means al-wara in Arabic. Al-wara. Abstinence is al-wara. Yeah. And what he talks about in this chapter is several things that are related to etiquette and I would say etiquette and also some personal traits. Again, he's building on the notion of character. But what you find here, you find some interesting example. And I think this is one of the chapters that we have to, read some of the examples that he's talking about. For example, you find him on page 64. Let's count sentences. 1, 2, 3. Okay. You find the sentence. I guess it's the 12th or the 13th. Starts with the first word in the line is the word matters, and then there's a period. There's a full stop. You see it, page 64. And he said also, one must beware of eating food in the marketplace if possible, because food of the market is more apt to be impure and contaminated. Eating in the market is also more remote from the contemplation of God and nearer to the neglect, I guess, of Him. And one should not eat in the marketplace, since the eyes of the poor fall on the food. The poor are not able to purchase anything. Thereby they are harmed, and the blessing of the food vanishes. See, the blessing of the food vanishes because they are harmed, not because they looked. Note that. You see how he said it. Thereby they are harmed. The poor become harmed, and the blessing of the food vanishes because they are harmed. Okay, so now we start. Let's put this part in context. 800 years ago, you would find people sitting in a mosque or in a place that we're sitting in, students from different parts of the Muslim world, Asia and Africa and so forth, and they're sitting reading this text 800 years ago. Okay, no cars, no jet planes, no elevators, no mobile phones, no emails, no internet. Okay, wagons, horses, camels. Okay, you can think of it. And what they're talking about, how they should not be eating in the market. And the very first reason is what? Hygiene. This is what he mentioned. Hygiene. Cleanness. He said, also, one must beware of eating food in the marketplace if possible, because food in the market is more apt to be impure and contaminated. Again, this verse, because people critique al-Turath, the Muslim tradition. Okay? Where is that in our curriculum today, in today's world? I mean, yes, you can find some things in the Arabic readings for elementary school students about the importance of cleaning the food and cleaning your hands before you eat, and so forth. But in terms of, 800 years ago, the kind of challenges, they did not have that kind of pollution that we have it now. They don't have factories, emitting different kinds and sorts of gas. They did not have smoking, for example, prevalent. They did not have all those different chemical wastes that are being used. They did not have, biotechnology to change things around in the makeup of organics and organic food, for example. They did not even have that kind of distinguishment between organic and non-organic. They did not have all of that. And yet, what they were talking about is, be careful, don't eat in the market because the food is not clean. It's very interesting. It's very interesting, I bet, to the students who come to study Sharia here in Egypt. If you all of a sudden, and I want you, as Egyptians perhaps can see this more, if you ask the students, the Sharia students from Al-Azhar University, and told them, let's gather up, we'll make a conference about the importance of hygiene and not to eat food in the market. how would people feel about it? Oh, you're wasting our times. We want to read the jurisprudence. We want to read the hadith. But this was a topic of discussion 800 years ago. They're talking about how hygiene is important for the learning. And how if you protect yourself from bacteria and infections is good. He would talk about this, by the way. But he would mention it as, he would talk about the phlegm. And it's, I hope that I'm pronouncing it correct this time. The PHLEGM. I think it's phlegm, right? Which is very similar to mucus, but it's a little bit different as far as I understand. Phlegm, PHLEGM. PHLEGM. It's very similar to mucus, but it's different than mucus. Phlegm is, as far as I understand, and you can correct me, because we have doctors here, it's the secretions that are a result of inflammation or bacterial infections. He talked about this afterwards, about how if the level of phlegm is high in one's body, that would affect memory, regardless of the correctness according to the modern day technological advances. But the notion is he's connecting between a cognitive ability and biological health. For him to do that 800 years ago makes me proud, to be honest. Okay? Again, but coming back, because this is another topic, coming back to this, they're talking about hygiene, and they're talking about, and note how he's originally talking about abstinence. And abstinence is about how to give up certain things that are permissible. They're not a sin, they're not illegal, but you're giving them up in terms of etiquette and in terms of having good qualities. And these manners, in turn, they would allow you to have more attention, they would allow you to focus, they would allow you to have a more self-control, and so on. So see how he was talking about abstinence. What he wanted originally, what he wanted to talk about in terms of food, is the part about not to eat in the market, and not to show your food for poor people, harming their feelings, and then you eat it. You understand? And see, he's always connecting the relationship between seeking knowledge and society. And why is he talking about that etiquette? Because if you are a student of knowledge, if you are a learner, if you're somebody who's looking to have a social role because of your involvement in the Muslim academia back then, alright, so you're preparing yourself to have a positive role in society. But if you have bad manners, they're not illegal, they're not a sin. But you're training yourself to not to care about poor people. And then if you keep doing that, do you imagine that once you become a professor, or once you become a researcher, would you care about the poor? You understand? So he doesn't want people to have contradicting manners. If you believe that your role to help society is through academia, well, you should have a spirit of helping society in general. And you should have an etiquette and manners towards the poor and towards the needy, not only in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of the marketplace. And before he has done that, before he introduced this idea, he introduced the idea of hygiene or cleanness. Again, he's stressing the personal responsibility to begin with. See, this is a training for the heart, what he has done here. And I want you to pay attention. He's talking about if you are helping society, so train yourself, you're trying to help society in the field of education, or in the field of law, or in the field of academia. Okay, very well. But make sure to help society in other fields as well, right? This is the original topic. But before he has done that, he doesn't want the student or the learner to always think about the people. Alright? it begins with a personal responsibility. So what he's building up an intention not to eat in the marketplace. And how does he build up that intention? He starts with the very core. You. If you eat in the market, this is not clean. Okay? So even if people are not harmed, you shouldn't be doing this after all. Okay? Do you now have that intention not to eat in the market? Oh, and by the way, that might harm feelings as well. So what he's trying to do is to build an intention based upon personal responsibility, not upon what people think. So he introduced the idea of personal responsibility, and then, by the way, people might be harmed. You get my point? So you would not be intending to act. He doesn't want you to stop eating in the market to start like acting, like showing off. Oh, I have wara, I have abstinence. I love the poor. See, I don't eat in the market because I love people. So instead of not to do that, how? He would introduce this idea by something personal. So if you start acting and saying, oh, I don't eat in the market, so people would not be harmed, another person might be like, or because you don't want to eat, food that is contaminated. You understand? Okay. Okay, and then he said, in being abstinent, on page 65, the third paragraph, in being abstinent, one must avoid associating with corrupt people and those who are sinful and negligent of their religious duties, and who strip God of His attributes. One must also choose the upright as one's neighbors, for without doubt proximity leaves its traces. Okay, there are two ideas here. The first, well actually it is the same idea. See what he has done? He had talked about two practical examples. One, don't be friends and don't associate yourself with people who are corrupt. No. Another practical example. Don't be in a neighborhood that is corrupt. Same thing. And then after that, he concluded, for without doubt, proximity leaves its traces. Meaning if you're interacting with people, they usually influence you in a certain way. And there are two different models in this. There is one thing called sorting, and the other one is called homophily, which is peer effects. See, sociologists have two, if I'm not wrong about the word homophily, but originally, or in other words, it's peer effects. Sociologists have two different ways to explain why people group together. So they have two models. One called peer effects or homophily, and the other is called sorting. And there are two books that came out. One is called The Big Sort, and the other is called Connected. And each book discusses a different. The Big Sort obviously talks about sorting, and Connected is talking about peer effects. Connected, I think, is by James Fowler and somebody else. I can't remember his name now. Okay. So in The Big Sort, the author is talking about, he's seeing certain things in the demographics of the United States of America. And what he wanted to study, to see how people move from one neighborhood to another. And what he started studying is people who move from a Republican neighborhood to a Democratic neighborhood. All right? And vice versa. This is one example. He presented different studies along these lines. What he's trying to present is that people seek out familiarity. You like to go to people who are very much like you, have the same interests. They would do this also with whites and blacks, for example. White people and black African Americans. Okay? So why people move from one neighborhood to another? So this idea is called sorting, that you like to be with those who are like you. The other idea is peer effects, which is a person who does not smoke, for example, starts smoking when he starts becoming friends with a group of people who are always smoking. And it usually starts as a casual cigarette, and then he or she develop the habit. And vice versa. People who give up smoking, do they give it up because they're within a group of people who, abstain from smoking, or hate smoking, or they don't smoke, and so forth? So the idea is, in both cases, either you explain assimilation according to sorting, or you explain assimilation according to peer effects. In both cases, human beings like to assimilate. Human beings are social beings. They're inherently social beings, as Aristotle has said. That we're social by nature. Okay? And for this reason, we assimilate. And even from a neuroscience perspective, even though it's somewhat debated, that we have something called the mirror neurons. And the mirror neurons are responsible for why you start copycatting the acts or the way a person talks. Right? If you spend some time with a person from a different country, you might start finding yourself using the same accent, for example, if it's the same language. So you find an Egyptian, with a Syrian, start mentioning or saying a couple of Syrian, words in a Syrian accent, or vice versa. You'd find Syrians all of a sudden, whenever you talk to them, you'd go like, Basha. And I'm like, okay, man, we don't use it that much, but okay, fine. Okay, I see, I can tell that you're becoming Egyptian. All right, good to go. But, right, you can tell, did you recognize that? Yeah. We say Basha a lot. I'm like, come on, guys. This is too much. But
girls and boys as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, this is a kind of assimilation. So in either cases, we like to copy each other. Okay? And this sometimes is a positive thing, and other times it's a negative thing. A negative thing would be the herd instinct. Same thing. And what we call the social proof. If something is famous and everybody is doing it, so it must be right. So this is the negative application for it. The positive application is it's allowing us to build communities. And different communities interact with each other, and you build different networks and societies and civilizations and nations and different sorts of groupings. You find it between human beings, and different kind of assimilations between you and your friends, and so forth. So it's positive in terms of being connected, and it's positive also in terms of finding a way to influence yourself sometimes. We have the hadith, the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the person who killed 99 people, and he wanted to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, see, the first part of this hadith is talking about the role of experts, and the second part is talking about the role of assimilation. Because after he killed 99 people, he went to the monk, or he went to the priest, or he went to the abid, the person who's always worshipping, to the worshipper. And he's not a scholar, but he's a worshipper. So he asked him, I have killed 99 people. Can I repent? Is there a way to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after I've done all of these things? And he said, no, what? 99 people? No way. So he killed them. There you go. Another one. There you go. 100 people. So he went to the scholar and asked him, I live in a community where people are not helping me. I kill and they cheer. And I have killed 100 people. Can I still repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, yes, you can. Go to that community, live with them. And then he died on the way. Right? And you know the rest of the hadith where the angels come down and they measure the distance between him and which community was he going to. The bad community or the good community. And it turns out he was closer to the good community. So the idea is, again, the scholar, when he found someone unable to intrinsically defeat his desire to commit illegal acts, he asked them to do what? Live with a community of people that provide you support. And this is not only with illegal actions and things, this is also with psychological disorders. People with depression, for example, are asked to have a support group. And support group are usually small group of friends who are helping the person who has a depressive disorder to overcome negative thoughts and to overcome certain triggers that would spark a depressive phase. You understand? So the importance of how we assimilate is very vital here. But what Imam Zarnuji is talking about, this is the foundations, all right? This is the framework that he's talking within. But here, his wording, not to assimilate, or he's saying, don't assimilate with bad people, with corrupt people. And note his wordings, and the translation is very close. One must avoid associating with corrupt people. And people who go into academia are very much challenged by this. Alright? Because, for example, in academia, as we mentioned before, you seek funds, for example, to do research, to fund scholarships, to design experiments, to build institutions. At the same time, the academics, they have certain opinions and they like to voice their opinions. And there are certain times where political pressure is being put not to release certain findings to the masses because that contradicts the strategic plan of the government and things of that sort. You can see that, or that was kind of prevalent in the notion of global warming, for example, where scientists who believe that there is something called global warming are not having enough media venues to speak out. All right? And they start helping themselves to do rallies and movements and go from as a grassroots movement. Yet, they could be hosted in TV shows. And they are, but not as they want. Not as they see the imminent and inevitable problem that we're facing. The governments don't facilitate that because it obviously will hinder certain benefits, certain interests that governments have. Because that will be a game changer. People will start doing things and doing voting according to certain things. According to green policies, for example. And that would be something new. They're not ready for that. Or they don't want to be ready for that. You understand? So again, academics, they have knowledge. They either understand what's going on or they propose something to be installed or to be applied or implemented in society. And on the other hand, governments or officials are trying to hinder certain things. So again, what he's saying is, don't associate with the corrupt, because once you go down that road, you cannot come back. And if you associate with the corrupt, you eventually become corrupt. And also, if a person becomes corrupt, they manipulate knowledge for the sake of corruption. You understand? And this is something Sheikh Zarruq has said, that a person who becomes with a corrupt trait or a corrupt personality, they corrupt their knowledge. They twist facts. Not necessarily atheists. You're talking about Muslims. Sheikh Zarruq was talking about any person, not necessarily an atheist who doesn't believe in God, any person who becomes corrupt. Remember, we said that knowledge is very attached to the core of the person. It's something related to the identity. And he has described knowledge as an attribute. So again, you know, and we have talked earlier today about how you see things according to your own personal experiences and so forth. So when a person becomes corrupt, the knowledge is corrupted. And that's why back then they would not allow students in their classrooms unless they examined their ethics and behaviors and manners. Right? And the student of Imam Malik who has said, I have lived with him 20 years. For 18 years I've been learning ethics, and 2 years I'm learning knowledge. So back then they used to stress the notion of character and qualities. Those of you have, did you see Interstellar? The movie. See how the professor played with interests and he had hidden facts and things of that nature for the sake of what? So again, I mean, corruption is something that whoever is into knowledge or academia has to put a distance between himself and governments. And that's why you find real academics, whether here in Arab societies or in the West, they don't push themselves to the government. Like they don't seek government attention. You understand? On the other hand, you find phony people. They try to seek government attention. They try to seek attention from people who are important. They try to seek attention from people who have control and decision making. Others, they focus on their own knowledge. And they don't ask for power. They don't ask for, being close to circles of decision making. And there was a famous Sufi Sheikh, Sheikh Akram Mazhar, and I did not have the privilege to study with him. He's actually he's a friend of my own Sheikh, but I did not have a privilege to study with him personally. And Sheikh Akram Mazhar, he has passed away, and he was one of the most active Sufi Sheikh here in Egypt, and he's done extensive efforts with students from the GUC and AUC, getting them into the Sufi path. And Sheikh Akram Mazhar, he was once talking about how he was invited to a trip with a friend of his, and during that, at the time of that invitation, that friend became a minister in the government. And he was a person, he was a friend, he was an acquaintance, he was somebody that he knew. And then he became part of the government. And they were traveling, I guess, to Tunisia or Morocco or something like that. And he received a phone call, "You're coming with us. Okay, you have a VIP invitation, and you'll be traveling with ministers and the chief or the prime minister on the same plane." And I remember what he said and this is videotaped on YouTube. I'm not making this up. And what he said then, I would not ride a plane with corrupt people. Those people, they commit injustice. So I would not be on the same plane. I used to know them beforehand, but now they're in control. They can decide things. So once they're in decision making, I will not get into the plane. And he said, our shuyukh has told us to stay away from corrupt people and not to be in the same places, not to enter the same majalis, not to enter the same places where they sit or they hang out or they go to, not to use the same kind of transportation like that. Okay? Yeah, and that's how you distinguish between a real Sufi and a Sufi who cheers for presidents. You understand? There are Sufis who are just cheerleaders. This is the cheerleading Sufi. Every time there's a new president, you start like that. Okay? A real Sufis, they stay away from governments, they stay away from decision makers, they stay away from people who have control. They don't seek them. You understand? But if you find a person who's seeking decision makers, who's seeking the king, they're not Sufis. That's a rule of thumb. I know this is out of topic. My sheikh yesterday has written something really interesting on Facebook. He said the same thing about Sufis. He said if you find a sheikh who's very interested, all right, who's very interested in his own pictures, just stay away from him. At least, not in terms of su'il dhann, meaning thinking bad of him, but at least in terms of just in case they might turn bad. You understand? And a person asked him, he said, or she said, well, sometimes people have to take pictures, or they take pictures to hold memories. So how would we know if that person is very much interested in his own pictures, if that out of personal desire or out of holding on to good memories? He said, if those pictures of he's not alone in them, like with other people. Otherwise, you're not holding memories of anybody. You're just showing off. You understand? So, real Sufis, and I'm not one of them, but real Sufis, they stay away from showing off. They stay away from decision making. They stay away from corrupt people, and so on. Okay. He also talked about different behaviors, like somebody who talks a lot or a great deal robs your time and wastes your time. And there is an interesting story where he mentioned that two people traveled abroad to do some international, like people now do, become international students or something. But back then, there was a big part of education in the Muslim world that you have to travel outside of your country or of your community, and you go to another community to study. So anyways, the two students, they traveled together to learn, and then they came back. One of them was well prepared and the other was not well prepared. And yet both of them were doing pretty much the same thing, studying with the same shuyukh and so forth. So why one of them is better than the other? So they start analyzing and asking them questions about their habits and personal habits and so forth. So one of them said that while he was doing the repetition and reading the Quran or reading the books of fiqh and so forth, he would do that while looking towards al-Qibla. Okay? And the other always had the Qibla behind him. Alright? So one always had always facing the direction of the Qibla, and the other was always facing the opposite direction of the Qibla. Okay, the Qibla which is towards Mecca. Okay. You might ask, why would that make somebody intelligent than the other? Why would make that, how does that add to the notion of retention and understanding and academic excellence? It's just a matter of a position. See? And one can read this story and start saying, look, those people are just about myths. Who said that the direction that you face when you're sitting down, reading your lesson, affects your long-term retention? Who says that? Again, this is another example where they don't mention the concept, but they mention an example of it. See, if you are studying Islamic Sharia, you would always study either in a place where there is a mosque, either in a mosque or a place where there is a group prayer is being held. So the direction for the Qibla is always there. And the prevailing culture that people face the Qibla out of seeking blessings. And also, the Prophet ﷺ used to, pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the 5 prayers, just praying, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would face the Qibla. So there is a culture that embraces the direction of the Qibla, whether as part of religion, or as part of prayer, or as part of the setup in the place. Okay? And yet, after all of these things, he's sitting the opposite way. So it's not necessarily because he said the opposite way, but sitting the opposite way, regardless of all of these reminders, says something about the character of the person. You understand? Okay? This is how you should read the text. Okay? So it's not merely because he sat the opposite way, but because of all of this rigor about the importance of the direction and the blessing and but he's not caring. So they use this behavior as an indicator of his carelessness.
So it's about the intention?
They're using this event as an indicator for his carelessness. You understand? But not necessarily the act itself. But since everything is pushing him to do that, and yet he's not, so that is an indicator of something. You understand? Okay. Okay, and then he ends this chapter with, and we stop here, then we have 2 remaining chapters and we finish. He ends this chapter by saying, and it is necessary to have a book with one under every condition in order to read it. It is said, he who does not have a book in his sleeve, because back then they used to have big sleeves like that, wisdom is not well established in his heart. It is also obvious